This is where you talk about denazification. So I'm watching this clip for the first time, I believe. The entirety of the Western media pretends that Putin is just making up the denazification thing, even though we are literally funding Nazis in Ukraine, even though there's a large neo-Nazi element in Ukraine that was well documented in the BBC and CNN in the West. They are pretending that the fact that they used to report on is a Russian conspiracy, and anyone who talks about Nazis in Ukraine is being a Putin apologist and doing the bidding of Putin. This is the narrative that we are told in the West. So let's hear from Putin himself. Once again, this is 5 minutes. I haven't seen this myself, so I'm actually curious to see this part. So let's dive into it. I'm going to let it play for a bit for you guys.
Denazification. After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity. And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler. I have already said that in the early 19th century, when the theorists of independence and sovereignty of Ukraine appeared, they assumed that an independent Ukraine should have very good relations with Russia. But due to the historical development, those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted and treated quite brutally, as well as were subject to cruel behavior. There were also attempts to destroy their identity. All this remained in the memory of the people. When World War II broke out, part of this extremely nationalist elite collaborated with Hitler, believing that he would bring them freedom. The German troops, even the SS troops, made Hitler's collaborators do the dirtiest work of exterminating the Polish and Jewish population. Hence this brutal massacre of the Polish and Jewish population, as well as the Russian population too. This was led by the persons who are well known, Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem.
And so, quick question, I'll let it continue because Putin is spitting. Do you guys think that President Biden, any Democrat or any Republican can explain the history of Ukraine the way that Putin has done? Putin knows exactly why he engaged in military action. This is why the Russian people support it. This is why Russians support the military action. Because he's able to explain this stuff to people. He's able to explain history and concepts, stuff that we never do, stuff that we never expect from our leaders. Our leaders can't even give a press conference. We have fucking press secretaries because our ruling class is so broken brain, they can't take live questions. Meanwhile, here's Putin just educating the fuck out of the entire world right now, destroying the entire corporate media narrative. I cannot stress enough how big this is. I'll shut up and let it continue.
And we are constantly told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we uproot them, and other countries fight against them. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected.
Now, oh my God, I'm sorry, but that's such an important point, guys. Because you guys know how, and this is what the NATO left would do all the time. They would say, oh man, they got Nazis in Ukraine, but don't they technically got Nazis in the other countries too? Don't you know they got Nazis in Ukraine? They got Nazis in Russia as well. Don't you know white supremacists exist in Russia? Why are you cheering for Russia? It's because you literally have streets named after Stefan Bandera. You got holidays named after Nazis. You have government-sponsored Nazism in Ukraine. The point that Putin makes that is devastating to their narrative is that, yes, every single country has a racism problem. Of course, white supremacy will exist wherever white people are. But at least it's not systemic like you in Ukraine. Russians fought and defeated the Nazis. The Russian culture and the Russian people hate Nazis. It's why Nazis have to hide in Russia. Meanwhile, they got fucking marches and political demonstrations in Ukraine. They banned collective bargaining. Textbook Nazi shit. One of the first things the Nazis did in Germany was steal the right to collectively bargain. Guess what Ukraine did? You don't have the right to collectively bargain in Ukraine. Almost like something the Nazis have in common. It's systemic. That's the difference. It's systemic. A very important point. I'll let it continue. Putin is spitting, man.
They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany. These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians. It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people.
And honestly, he's going to talk about it later, when you see Canada give a standing applause to an SS soldier, a fucking Nazi, that's denazification. The West has been taken over by Nazis. We explained many times before, NATO incorporated Nazis into their ranks. The West incorporated Nazis into their rank. So Putin, what he's doing next to his border is denazifying his border. Because there is a giant Nazi problem in the West. But let's continue.
And prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people. They say, no, we are a separate people. Okay, fine. If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied?
I'm sorry I keep stopping the guys, but god damn it, do you guys realize how such a devastating point? And that is exactly why they would never play Putin in Western media. Because I've seen so many of these segments, fam. Believe me, so many segments where Putin said he wanted to impose Russian national identity on the Ukrainians. But what Putin says here is, even though he prefers them to consider themselves Russians, like many in the East does, he's not going to impose it on them, and that's their choice. The only red line he draws is that you guys don't engage in Nazism, which is a longtime enemy of the Russians, because the Russians defeated the Nazis. This is a completely devastating point that the NATO left kept bringing up, that the entire Western fucking NATO establishment brought up. But I'll let it continue. This is a banger interview, fam.
With the territory that you have now.
I want to go back so you guys hear the question again. My bad.
On the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification. Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. This story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries. The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II? Hitler and his accomplices. It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews. The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism, but how? How do you do that?
And I want to know what you guys think in the comment as well. This is my interpretation based on what I have seen. I think Tucker, he's seeing what the West is saying. He knows what the West will say if he like kisses Putin's ass. So I think Tucker is trying to appear tough to Putin because he don't want his social class to say that he gave a softball interview to Putin. That's why Tucker has a much tougher stance than people thought he would. But Tucker is completely out of his goddamn league, and it's clear. And this is my interpretation. I want to hear what you guys think as well. But I think Tucker is trying to be tough on Putin, but he can't. Like every time he tries to push back regarding China, you know what I mean? Regarding how much territory that Putin want to take over. He's trying to do this to protect his reputation among his class. But it's not going so well because Putin outclasses him in every single way. But I'm gonna let it continue. This is my take on it. I'm interested to see whether you guys agree or disagree on that.
You want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism, but how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень tонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very
Можно я
subtle,
скажу, как я думаю?
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий, он очень противный, этот вопрос.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example
русских,
lives on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews,
президент,
Russians, and
действующий
Poles are
президент
alive.
сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian parliament,
Ah.
gives
Разве мы
a
можем сказать, что
standing
мы
ovation.
целиком выкорчевали
Can we
эту
say that
идеологию,
we have
если
completely
то, что мы
uprooted
видим,
this
происходит
ideology?
сегодня?
Putin saying the same shit that we say on RBN, my friends. CJ, my brother, my RBN friends, my friends and family. Is that the exact same thing we say on the channel? We told you guys that Nazism was never defeated. They fucking got transferred to different departments. They moved them around and gave them different titles. Nazism is live and well in the West, and this is the language that Putin is using to destroy the West. Why do you guys think Africa is siding with Russia? There have been all these Cope articles of how the Africans are so dumb they falling for Putin propaganda. Why are the Africans falling for Putin propaganda? Why is Lula falling for Putin propaganda? Because Putin is going to their house. They are going to Africa and he is explaining to this shit to them. He like, hey guys, you guys know that Canada cheer for a Nazi in their parliament? And niggas like, what? They did what? This is why they can't fuck with Putin, fam. This is why they won't ever platform stuff he says, because Putin knows everything about the West. He knows all their weaknesses. He knows how to attack them. He knows all their hypocrisies. Meanwhile, if you look at the compilation of the corporate media talking heads that I was telling you guys before, that I was showing you guys at the beginning of the show, they couldn't even tell you what the Minsk Accords are. They couldn't even tell you half of the stuff that Putin's telling you. So what's the most important thing to know if you're combating an enemy? The most important thing to know is to know your enemy. You had the West that engaging in propaganda war, and they don't even know their enemy. Putin knows everything about the United States. Meanwhile, our media propagandize and spread so many lies about Russia, they start to believe it themselves. And since they start to believe that Russia is incompetent, they got this battle and they're lazy. They don't have the fucking equipment that Putin does because they're underestimating them. But Putin and Russia is not underestimating the United States, which is why they are kicking their ass geopolitically. Which is why Putin is making Tucker Carlson look like an intellectual lightweight. And this shit is glorious. And we love to see it, my friends. I'm going to let it continue, and I'm going to read some super chats before I forget. I'm going to take a super chat break just so I don't forget.
Gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is. That is what we mean.
Right, Mike.
So the media have been pretending that Putin has been making up this claim of denazification. Can you imagine, based on this answer that you heard, what would happen if any CNN reporter were trying to bring up the fact that Putin make up denazification? Putin would clown those motherfuckers to their face. He'll bring up the fact that Canada cheered on the Nazi. He'll bring up all this history that they don't know. And since they don't know it, they wouldn't know how to deal with it.